Hi everyone, I'm Mike and this is the Sunday Art Show. Now this week we're going to be coming back to the Animal Alphabet Challenge, and if you've recently joined the channel, the idea here is that I'm trying to stretch my artistic muscles by depicting animals that I don't normally paint, and I'm gradually working my way through the alphabet. So the last time I did one of these was episode V, and that was watercolour and Sharpie painting of a vulture. So I always use Sharpie marker and then I use watercolour on top. And then last time, so this was a couple of months ago, because I've been doing a lot of portraits for the Sky Portrait Artist of the Week recently. So the Unknown Life Form left a really lovely comment and said, hey Mike, if you ever need help with episode W, which is the episode we're on now, then I know a few animals. So we've got weasel, wallaby, wolf, woodpecker, wildebeest, walrus, warthog and wolverine. Just some ideas for you, man. So I thought, okay, well let's check out Pixabay and see what we've got. So weasels are available, but I've previously drawn some weasels. I mean, this was 12 years ago, so it could be a candidate. Did a couple of cartoons as well. This is Weasel PI, and this is a weasel and a dog fighting over a frisbee. And then we've got a wallaby here, so definitely an interesting animal to draw, but I did already do a kangaroo for episode K. I haven't actually got around to doing the watercolour yet. So at the start of the challenge, I was just doing Sharpie marker pen drawings in black and white, but as the challenge has gone on, I've started to introduce colour with washes of watercolour, and I'm going to go back and do colour for the ones I've left in black and white. Right, next up is a wolf, so that's definitely a possible. Never drawn a wolf before. But in the challenge, I have previously drawn a fox. Sorry, not in the challenge. Previously in life, I've drawn a fox. For the challenge, episode D, I did a dingo. So obviously all in the dog family, and I've done dogs as cartoons as well. This guy's driving a truck over the years. But the wolf's definitely possible. Woodpecker, definitely haven't done that before. I have done a few birds in the challenge though. Now wildebeest. This is a definite candidate. Such a weird looking animal. Never done anything like this. So yeah, I'm definitely interested in doing that one. Walrus. Again, really interesting to draw that. Never done it before. Did do a seal for episode S fairly recently. Apologies to any marine biologists or zoologists who are not going to be happy with what I'm about to say, but from an artist's point of view, they're not that dissimilar, although you've got the wonderful tusks here, of course. So that's definitely a possible. And then we've got the warthog. Haven't done that before either. Another amazing creature. And then finally we've got the wolverine. I drew the superhero version of Wolverine back in '92, I think, so 18 years ago, but I haven't done the animal. So not going to do all of those, but let's narrow it down to a few. All right, so I've narrowed it down to the wolf, the wildebeest, the warthog, and the wolverine. And I think out of those remaining four, my favourite is the wildebeest. So that's the one I'm going to go for. So let's get drawing. So as usual for the Animal Alphabet Challenge, I'm using A4 mixed media paper and my black Sharpie marker pen. And you can see I'm showing you the wildebeest speeded up somewhat. And I'll kind of explain why I'm doing that in a moment. And then we'll go on to the warthog, which I'm going to do later. So as normal, I'm putting in the outline of the animal, and I do this without any pencil drawing. So the idea, again, this is part of the challenge. Can I sketch accurately with a Sharpie, which is a permanent marker? So I've got my proportions reasonably good there, and then having done that, I put in some shading, and I use a variety of cross-hatching and dots if I just want some light shading, because the Sharpie marker, although surprisingly expressive, it's still a permanent marker. It's black and it's got a pretty thick nib, so it's not, it's not as sensitive or as graduated in terms of the mark making compared to a graphite pencil, for example. I put in just some minimal indication of the grassland that the animal is occupying. And, having done that, added some hairs to the back, and I darkened more fully the head of the animal. But the dots I quite enjoy using with the Sharpie, actually. They add quite a surprising amount to a black and white drawing, I feel. Now what I normally do is I scan in the black and white drawing and then I do the watercolour washes. So I kind of get two pieces of artwork for the price of one, but I messed up on this particular day. I forgot to scan in both of my black and white drawings. Anyway, I wetted the paper, grabbed my big round synthetic watercolour mop brush, and you can see I just put in a weak wash of ultramarine blue on the background and then some stronger blue for the shadows of the animal. Then I put down some of the cadmium yellow on the grasslands and a little bit of green mixed up from the yellow and the blue, and I let that kind of blend in quite softly. A little bit of burnt umber added to the animal now, and periodically I'm lifting off regions where the paint has gone astray or gone on a little bit too strongly with a paper towel. So I've always got the paper towel at hand. But working wet and wet, very, very loose, even a bit of the pure alizarin crimson here on the grassland. And so, you know, one of the things I do in my art, and I've mentioned this many times in videos, is that if there's a subtle hue somewhere, I'll often enhance it quite a lot. But with these Animal Alphabet Challenge videos, you know, I'm perhaps doing that more than ever, really. So having let that first layer of paint pretty much dry, I come in with some thicker washes, still fairly fluid, and I gradually build up the colour and enhance the tone here and there as I move around the animal and the minimal landscape that I've got there. And it's always, you know, it's always a question, well, you know, when do I stop? And, you know, how closely do I want to depict this animal to the reference? And, you know, I'm not an artist which goes for photographic replication at all. And when I added this sort of burst of orange here, I thought, well, actually, I quite like the way that's working next to the blue on the animal. So I kind of, it's not really, you know, that accurate in terms of the way the animal looks in real life, but I like the look of it as a design. So I kept that and continued to work around the animal, adding more and more detail and more vibrant colours. And then I decided to make the sky almost pure yellow. So that's kind of in keeping with that elephant painting I did a couple of weeks ago, if you remember. I used a yellow sky there as well. Lifted off a little bit of that with the water brush, with the paper towel, but not too much. So you can see the Wildebeest is sort of near completion, a few finishing touches. So here are some close-ups of that one. You can see the dots there, they work okay. And I really quite like this finished painting now, but at the time I wasn't 100% sure of it. But it's quite a striking stylized image, and I wanted to have another go, so I switched to the Warthog that I showed you earlier. And I wanted to try and be more efficient and more minimalist with this one compared to what I'd done with the Wildebeest. So as mentioned, I've been doing a lot of portraits, and they can be quite involved, the portraits. And it's been a few weeks now since I did an Animal Alphabet Challenge, and so I kind of was a little bit rusty on the technique that I'd kind of developed over the course of the challenge, and I wanted to tune back into that, so try to be just a little bit more efficient than I was with the Wildebeest. So I'm back in with my mixed media paper, again with my Sharpie marker, and taking a little bit more care perhaps than I did with the Wildebeest. But once again, I'm just looking really carefully and trying to get it right first time, but without stressing about it. So the idea is to not spend too long on the drawing, you know, ideally 5 to 10 minutes. And I've just speeded things up here a little bit as I move around the head. And just, you know, one of the really good things about drawing with the Sharpie is it really trains you to kind of measure with the eye. So as I'm drawing, I'm looking and seeing, well, where does the top of that tusk line up horizontally? How does that line up with another part of the animal's body? Now the forelegs, the two front legs, they're so close together in this particular reference that I decided to just draw them as a single thick, combined giant leg entity, if you like. So often when animals have their two legs close together, viewed from the appropriate angle, especially if they're in quite deep shadow, the two forms almost merge together. So it's a really efficient way to deal with that, is to just draw it as one. Just draw it as one lump of thing, one shape. But then moving on to the torso of the animal. Now the warthog has these amazingly long hairs on its back. It's almost like a toupee on its back, really. Now don't get too involved with that. I just indicated the outline of it there, sweeping down the back. And then I'm going to the hindquarters of the animal. There are also some hairs there, but we'll come back to that later. And again, just speeding up a little bit for you. as I put in the rear legs and the tail. So next I return to where I started, and I'm looking again at my line work as I apply the shading. So generally I'm using short little lines to shade, sometimes cross-hatching, but I'm not only being aware of the surface and the shadows cast. So for example, the left-hand tusk there, that's casting a little shadow on the snout that I put in just a moment ago. But in addition, what I will do is, if I feel my line drawing is, inaccurate and needs correcting, then I'll take that shading beyond the line, as I did for the part of the jawline there. So you can kind of use the shading to expand, or sometimes even slightly contract your drawing if you want to. And again, the Sharpie also I find is training me the Sharpie is also training me to kind of learn what I can get away with a little bit more as well. So I want the animal to look realistic, but sometimes I'll have put in a line which I think it's not quite right, but I'll look at the drawing as a whole and think, as a whole, I can still get away with that. It still looks like a convincing animal. So speeding things up just a little bit again for some more hatching, but I wanted to just show you these lines here at normal speed. You can see these are kind of creases in the hide of the animal, and those act as wonderfully as contours, so that's really worth including. Now I shade the two front legs as one mass, as mentioned before, and then I start to introduce a cast shadow. And notice that it's only subtle, but I change the density of the shadow as it moves away from the animal there. So you see the far right end of the shadow is weaker and less of a dark tone than the rest. And I also make the shadow squiggly and put in some outlines of little grasses and things to show that the shadow is falling over some grass. So that's a really efficient way to do things. A few more of those contour lines and some deeper shadow on the belly and the hindquarters. And again, notice I'm curving the lines around the hindquarters to describe the form. Just a loose, minimal indication of the environment the animal's occupying. And then I just kind of reassess the drawing as a whole and think, well, are there any finishing touches? Because I could pretty much leave it there if I wanted to. But I just kind of look at my reference with fresh eyes, check that I haven't, missed anything out. A few dots just to add a little bit of variety to the type of tone I'm using. And now at the end, I put in some loose sweeping lines to try and capture the hair along the back of the warthog, and a few of the long hairs on the hindquarters as well. So that's the drawing aspect pretty much done. And what I wanted to do this time, when I applied the watercolour, in contrast to the Wildebeest, I wanted things to be a little bit more controlled. So I haven't wetted the paper first. I'm just taking a little bit more care to sweep in this wash of cadmium yellow. So I'm starting with the lightest and brightest colour that I can see on the animal, or at least my version of the lightest colour I can see on the animal. And I just sweep that pretty much over the entire silhouette. And it's really nice to paint over the top of the Sharpie, because you don't have to worry at all about the lines moving or getting smudged or anything like that. And as you can probably hear, I'm just grabbing some paper towel now, and I'm just going to lift off little bits of that wash here and there to put in some highlights, but these are going to be quite soft edged highlights and rather imprecisely defined highlights as well. It's just going for the rough area where the light is catching the most, because we can always refine the shape in a bit. So next I come in with, it's kind of a browny orange, so it's alizarin crimson, mostly cadmium yellow, and just a touch of the blue, the tiniest amount, just so it's not too vibrant and orange. I sweep that in over the mid-tone areas using the same big brush. Just lifted a little bit off with the finger there. And then I sweep in a nice deep reddy brown. And you can see how I've got some sort of broken edges to the first swathe of colour I put down below the animal. And then a rather weak, slightly weaker wash going through the background. And I love the kind of effects you can get with watercolour, and just kind of when we trust ourselves to leave alone the first mark that we've put down, there's like a purity to the texture and the quality of the edges that you get sometimes, that if you fiddle with it, you know, you'll never get it better, I don't think. So for that reason, I plan on leaving those reddish sweeps of horizontal colour completely alone. And while I've been chatting away, I'm just putting in a green, somewhat more mottled effect in between the two. So it's a minimal suggested environment, but I'm still being aware of variation in texture and colour. Now with the sky last time, I kind of flooded it with a wash, but this time I wanted to be more controlled. So it's just ultramarine blue, and I'm using a synthetic flat rounded brush to just very gently, with horizontal brush strokes for the most part, just gently sweep that background in, that sky in, so that it's somewhat controlled. Because the paint's running out of my brush as I work from top to bottom, the blue's naturally going to get lighter, so I'm getting a little bit of dry brush effect. But providing I come right up to the edge of the animal, that's okay. I don't mind that at all. And it's in keeping with the way a sky often appears, how it becomes fainter as we work our way towards the horizon. But it's a somewhat different effect to what I would have got if I just swept in a flood of wash onto damp or wet paper. So while I was chatting away and working away on the background, the washes of colour on the animal are mostly dry, so I'm coming in with some darker tone now. And I never worry too much about, you know, if I apply dark colour over some deep shadow that I've put down with the Sharpie marker pen, I don't worry too much about if I'm going to lose the line work underneath. There are two reasons for this, really. The first is, well, perhaps three reasons. The first is, you know, if I lose the line work, then I just get a more painterly effect, so that's okay. The second reason is if I put it down and I think, oh no, it's gone on too dark, then I can always lift some off with the paper towel. But thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, I find that in general, no matter how dark I put down the watercolour, when it dries, it becomes somewhat more transparent and the line work shows through anyway, even if it's only subtle. And I really like that layered quality of the finish that you get. So this is the same colour, it's just kind of running out on the brush, and I'm applying it in different areas of the animal where I need a lighter mid-tone. A few patches of orange, you know, partly influenced by the orange I put down on the Wildebeest before, but the orange is much more in keeping with the natural colour of the Warthog. And you can see I've switched now to a smaller synthetic round watercolour brush. So I love using the really chunky big mop brush. I like using as large a brush as possible for as long as possible, but it does get to the stage where no matter how careful I am, if I stay with the big brush, then in some senses I feel I'm hampering my progress, and I don't want that. So, you know, I'll switch to a smaller brush if I need to. Adding a few details around the head now. And you can really, you know, it's surprising how long the paint lasts on a single load of the brush with watercolour, I think. You know, you can just tease out little bits of extra colour just with the tip of the brush. You can dip back into a patch of colour you put down a moment ago, just like I am now, and kind of drag out the edges of that pool of colour. So in some ways watercolour is incredibly unforgiving. But in other ways, I think, you know, it's so forgiving that it's wonderful. You know, it's and I guess that's the fascination artists have with it. It's so spontaneous volatile in its way, I suppose. So some more purpley shadows now coming in on top of the tone I've just put down. And a little bit of cast shadow underneath that matted hair on the back. But hopefully you can see now that I'm starting to work up the animal into a more detailed state. Far more colours and detail of line work. I feel now that the purity and the simplicity of the background, it makes for a really nice contrast between the main focus of the image, which is obviously the warthog, and the background. So I'm really glad that I just left the ground and the sky with such a simple treatment. So I can't believe that I'm on episode W of the Animal Alphabet Challenge, so just X, Y and Z to go, so only three more episodes. And I'm really glad I stuck with the challenge, because it's I've kind of dipped in and out of it over the last several months. But I think next time I do a challenge, I probably won't make it 26 stages long. Perhaps make it a little bit shorter, so it's a little bit more manageable. But I'm looking forward to sort of seeing the finished collection of work, which it's been a good, fun project to do. It's led me to find new ways of drawing and painting, and that's always a good, fun thing. But now what I'm doing is just putting in a few little highlights. So this is actually pure ultramarine blue, fairly weak wash. And I've just taken my flat synthetic brush, which is somewhat frayed at the ends, and I'm just adding in these little bursts of blue here and there. So there's a little bit of blue in some of the highlights, but it's very weak in the reference photo. Where the light from the sky is perhaps bouncing off the animal. But I just like to enhance it just a little bit here and there. There's a little bit of blue around the eye as well, which I'll put in a moment. But in particular, the reason I'm enhancing it, gone to a smaller brush around the eye, is that obviously blue and orange are complementary colours. And so those little bursts of blue will really help the orange pop on the animal, I think. I had a request the other day to do more of the style of video that I did a couple of years ago now, where I do a full tutorial in real time of a painting. But let's say the painting takes 2 hours, then I would break that up into 12 10-minute videos, so you can do sort of 10 minutes a day if you want to and follow along with me. So I'm thinking of doing some more of those at some point. So if that appeals to people and you've reached this far into the video, then feel free to leave me a comment and let me know if you'd like to see tutorials of that nature. Now the brush I'm using here for the detail, I've actually changed my method when it comes to brush choice for detailed work. Doing the portraits recently, I found that rather than use a small round brush, if I use a very small flat pointed edged brush, so the shape of the brush is almost like a little shovel, I find that works a lot better actually. But just adding a few touches now to the animal, going back to my flat brush as it happens, just to sweep in a little bit of texture for the hair on the back and a little bit of colour there as well. And notice I've left deliberately a couple of blooms in the watercolour washes by the rear legs, so I left those quite deliberately. I like the effect that those have on the ground. I think that works quite well. I don't want too many of them, but the odd cauliflower here and there I think can be a good thing anyway. So there's a close-up of the head, the rear legs. Anyway, so that's that painting done. I hope you enjoyed this double demo, and I hope to see you next Sunday for the next episode of the Sunday Art Show. Thanks very much for watching.